Okay, hi. So today I am going to be reviewing all the books I read in December and January. I read a lot more in the past 2 months than I had been reading, so I have a lot of books to get through, so we'll see how much time I take on each one of them. So the first one I'm going to talk about is The Inmate by Freida McFadden. This is a thriller. You find this woman in her current life, and it's the after of what has happened. And she was living in the city, like New York City, with her son, and then she moves back up to where she's from after her parents pass away, and she gets back in touch with her best friend growing up, and as he lives in this town still. And she gets a job as a nurse at a prison, and she hopes she doesn't run into this one inmate, but that's how this goes. So she runs into the inmate, and you get to see her relationship to this inmate in the before, and you get the kind of before scenes of the day that something happened, or the weeks leading up to something. Well, yeah, the day something happened, and the events that led to this person being imprisoned. And so you kind of are bouncing back and forth, and then like things happen. It wasn't a super memorable book. I like the trajectory that newer thrillers are going into, where I guess when I was reading more of them in like 2018 to 2020, there was a lot of plot twist on top of a plot twist on top of a plot twist, and we've kind of gotten away from that, which I like as a genre, but it still wasn't that. It was fine. It was fine. It's hard to recommend a thriller or say this is a good thriller for someone or not, because it depends on if you like the twist and if you like the tropes. And if you don't, you can't tell someone if they're going to like those or not, because a lot of the time those are spoilers. Okay, next one is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This was everywhere a few years ago. This follows Addie LaRue through her life where she does not age, and she has lived hundreds of years, originally in France, and now, as you're watching her in the modern perspective, she is in New York City. You are getting a dual timeline in this. You're seeing modern events, and you're seeing like the momentum of what brought her to there, but through the course of hundreds of years, so there's a lot of time jumps happening. This was much sadder than I thought it was going to be. The concept is that she sold her soul to a god, and she never ages, and she lives forever. And no one remembers her. That's the flaw of it. And it's very lonely and isolated, and the way that she uncovers what has happened to her is quite sad. I was not expecting just the entirety of the book to be as sad as it was. There's a plot point that personally I had a hard time looking over. So there's, I can let a lot go when it comes to fantasy and like sci-fi, whatever. But the idea is that people don't remember her. And before I picked up this book, I thought that meant that the next day they forget her. No. They stop being in the same room as her and they forget her. And what I find very bizarre about that is she spends the nights with people fairly often because no one remembers her, so she can't have a place to live, so she has nothing to really call her own. And so she may repeat the same one-night stand over and over again. But there comes a point where someone needs to go to the bathroom. And I'm like, what is she doing when someone has to go to the bathroom? Like, how? she's not following them in, and, like, if she meets them for dinner and then stays at their house until they go to bed, like, odds are there's, like, a period of time where you cannot be in the same room. So it didn't ruin the book for me, but it was just one of those things that I found, like, irksome as a reader that probably wouldn't bother other people. I think that one of the negatives maybe is that it felt very repetitive. It's intended to, because she's living kind of like the same life, same day, same lack of forward momentum over and over again, because, like, the kind of concept is if you don't have anything to retain or hold on to, like, how are you growing into a future? But overall, I still really enjoyed a lot of what was happening in the book. Okay, then I read Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. This is a historic fiction that starts out with a bunch of people in a bar storytelling, and then the story starts to actually happen to them. So they're all telling stories, and then someone appears in the bar looking half drowned with a girl in his arms who appears at first to be dead. And then that's kind of what the story takes off from. The first part, you're getting a lot of different perspectives of the people who are going to come to matter later. And so you get that scene, and then you get everyone kind of talking about what happened, and then you start to plop from person to person in current time and past time to kind of get you up to speed on all of the characters that you need to know about. That was that really dragged the pace from where it began, because you don't know why you're really being introduced to all of these characters. The story really surrounds this mystery of the girl. Part of it, herself, like why did we think she was dead? Why didn't we realize she was a girl at first? Why did we think she was like a puppet or something to that effect? And then, like, who does she belong to? And there's like this kind of clashing of people and idea of who she belongs to, and everyone kind of feels a way about her. There's like a historic kind of sense of, it's a historic fiction, and then there's a sense of, like, not mysticism, but like almost like fairy tale-esque. Is there some magic at play in this? And I feel like everything and all the ends of the, like, there's a lot of like little pieces of the story floating around, and I feel like the author does a good job pulling them all together in the end, but it was a bit slow for my liking and a little bit meandering. But I think that you can tell the author is like really good at her craft and how she kind of wraps everything together. Okay, now let's talk about 3 short Christmas books I read. So I read Santa Baby. It's about a single mom who is down on her luck, runs out of gas during a snowstorm or something to that effect, ends up being taken in by a family, and romance. Then I read Mangoes and Mistletoe by Adriana Herrera. This is like a romance, like a female-female romance, where they're on a baking show and they're both Dominican, and one of them is like, yeah, we're both Dominican, that's cool, and the other one's like, oh, it's so cliche to put the Dominicans together because they get paired up because it's a baking show, and then, romance. So it's not like enemies to lovers, but they have like a lot of disagreements at the beginning, and it was short and not fleshed out like novellas are, and yeah, it was fine. Then I read Mistletoe at Moonglow. Bad. Just bad. I don't know, it was a novella, I don't really know the point of it, it wasn't a romance, and like the protagonist, it was just like too quirky. It's a no. Like it felt unfinished, and it felt like, I just don't read it, that's it. I just don't recommend reading it. I'm not going to say much about it, but I finished The Realm of the Elderling in December. I finished Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb. That is the last book in the series as it currently stands. I had a lot of feelings at the end of this. I think in terms of, looking at it holistically, really fitting ending to where you start in Assassin's Apprentice. It makes sense. A lot going on in the third book. A lot of wrapping up of the book itself, of the trilogy, but also of the world. A lot of stuff was left open in a way that to me is very satisfying. I feel like there's a lot open in like the live ship kind of parts of the world that in the live ship and Rainwild parts of the world that could really be utilized in future books if she ever chose to write in them. And satisfying ending for where some of the characters end up. I didn't agree with everything, which is to be expected. In a book like this, you can't win it all. Overall, that trilogy isn't my favorite of all of the trilogies. And even of the Fitz trilogies, I probably prefer Tawny Man to it. But wow, what a ride, a 16-book series that I really enjoyed the process of reading. And I'm actually rereading the first trilogy right now. I'm in Royal Assassin. So, but I'll get into that later because I started the first one in January. Okay, now we're into my January reads. The first thing I finished in the year is Jade War by Fonda Lee. This is the second book in the Greenbone saga, and quite good. These books are less action-packed than I would assume at face value based on how people describe them. There's a lot of relationships and there is politics, but it's like the politics of being in a formalized mob, I guess, because the Greenbones, there's two different warring clans, but like they're sanctioned, like their ways of life are sanctioned. They are technically allowed to kill each other on the streets and stuff, and the government is accepting of that. And they're both in government or have people that work in government in some capacity. So there's like the politicking between the two clans, the war going on, there's the politicking in the island that it's set on, and then in Jade War you really get more politicking of what's going on outside, but it's more of like the laying of pieces for what's to come than it really feels like it is like the fruition of things and watching the politics happening. It's kind of like you're seeing what I think is going to be set up for things that will occur in Jade Legacy, like we're putting the chess pieces in place. But a lot of the book is really about the relationships between people, like what loyalty looks like to different people in the clan and like the families within the clan. I liked that we got to see other parts of the world in this one. I like that Fonda Lee isn't afraid to like do things to her characters to really make them go through something. She's not afraid to kill her characters. She's not afraid to make kind of like daring choices within her narrative. I'm really curious to see how I feel about Jade Legacy. I started it and something one of the characters was doing, I was like, ugh, I'll come back to that. Gave me the ick. So, really curious to see how these books all come together. I enjoy the process of reading them, but can't really formulate like a thought on how I really think the series is going until I get to the end. Okay, and then I read Atomic Habits, An Easy and Proven Way to Build Good Habits and Break Bad Ones by James Clear. This is a nonfiction. I guess you could kind of call it self-help. It's basically an instructional book on like how to habit build. So if you're not in a place where you want to learn how to change your habits, or like you think that your life is completely fine, or like mentally you're not even in a position in your life where you can think about your habits because you have other things to worry about, then it's not really a good book to read. This is one of those books that, you know, those like, there's like apps where it's like, read this nonfiction book in 15 minutes and it's just giving you the bullet points of the book. This is one of those books that you could just absolutely use with that. Like he gives you points and he tells you the why behind the points. But if you don't care about the why, then there's not really a point in, it feels like, reading the whole thing. Like you could really just read the intro and like the summary of each chapter and get all you need out of it. There are a few things that I took away from the book where it's like I might have a habit in my life that I don't really know how to implement correctly, and I was implementing it in a way that he talks about in the book without really thinking about it, but then it turned out this other method would work better for me. So I do think it has value, but a lot of people say this book is life-changing, and I guess if you're just, you don't know how to motivate yourself, you don't have good habits in place, you don't know how to build yourself up, like if you're in a position where you're like, I don't know how the heck to make my life work for me, then I guess this could be life-changing. But if you're just like, casually like, yeah, like I could like tweak things here and there, you probably already have a lot of the skills that are mentioned in this book. I read a decent amount of classics in January, so let's start with one. I read Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Okay, so this is, I guess, kind of like a coming of age. You see Jane Eyre from her youth into her early adulthood. You follow her in the early stages of her life when you find out she's an orphan, and then she goes to school, and then you see her life after school. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this book. It is thick, and I found the entire thing very intriguing. I really liked the writing style. I thought it was like very, at least from my perspective, it wasn't easy to read, but it was easy to get into the kind of the pace of, and like the writing style was pretty easy for me to adjust to. And it was just kind of like fun. You get to see her kind of move through her life and kind of grow into the person she's going to become, and then face like really strange situations. There was a lot of like Christian overtones to the book, and like there's these characters that are set up as like these male characters that are kind of presented as like the good and the evil, the temptation and like the better path. I was surprised by where it went for when it was written. There's a lot of like really long monologuing scenes that I feel like is just kind of reminiscent of the era. But overall, I just thought it was fun. There's clearly a lot of sexism in it, in a way where it still feels like it was feminist for the time, which is kind of an interesting thing to digest as a modern reader. And then there was like the racist aspects of the book that I can't really get into for the spoilers of what happens, but it's just like completely overlooked, which I guess, you know, I guess as like you can see and perceive this as a modern reader, but at the time it was just very like casually racist, which is what I see in a lot of the classics I read. It's just like so casually racist that it's like there is no conversation around it. This is casually misogynistic sometimes, but in a way that it's kind of critiqued by the feminist lens that I think exists within the narrative, but you don't see that in the aspects of race. I found it a really fun read overall, and moved on to more classics in the month. Which the next thing I read was another classic. It was Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. This is my second Jane Austen book. I had first read Emma a few years ago. This book was quite short. I listened to it on audio, as I did Jane Eyre, by the same narrator, which I really liked her style for these classics. And you follow I don't even remember the protagonist's name, but she goes into society at Bath with this family that she knows from her town. And she befriends a woman, and it's just, the first half of the book is a lot of like critique to society at that time via the vehicle of satire. Everyone is like over the top in how terrible they are, and it's just so like in your face, and it was fun to read. It made me laugh, but it started to get a little tired and stale. It went on for a little bit longer than I wanted it to. But this is called Northanger Abbey, and everyone talks about it as Jane Austen's like satirical Gothic novel. So you get this, but it's almost like, to me, you get the satire in the first half and you get the Gothic in the second half, where she goes to this abbey after meeting people in Bath. And I kind of thought that there would be a little bit more hijinks going on. She goes and stays with this family that she met, and she's befriended the girl, and she kind of likes the guy, and she's not sure how she feels about the father, and then the mother has passed away, but like, what if she hasn't? And like, what's going on with this family? I felt like that part of the book was trying to be like suspenseful in a way that I don't really think it achieved. And then it kind of comes back together in the end. And overall, like, I thought it was fun enough, but I didn't like overly love the book. Ooh, and then I read The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. This is the first book in the His Dark Material series. I vlogged my entire experience, so I'm not going to say much, but I didn't really enjoy this. This is a middle grade book that was written in the late 90s. It's a fantasy that takes place in our world, kind of. It's like our world adjacent. There are places that are named the same thing, but it's a hard sell for me because there's a lot of jargon used that's not really explained, and I didn't really feel like any of the characters were that fleshed out. I felt the plot was oversimplistic, and there was nothing that really could get into the way of the protagonist from just getting through what she needed to do. It was very linear feeling, and then there was like this thing that just felt like very heavy plot armor, and I got to the end and just really didn't like where it went as a book. So that's all to say, I did not like this book at all. I would have DNF'd it if I wasn't vlogging it, and but tons of people love this, so they obviously see something in it that I do not. So yeah, but from my perspective, it just wasn't really that well executed. Then I read Olga Dies Dreaming. This is a contemporary that takes place in 2017, 2018. So you're following two older characters. They're in their mid and late 40s, and they are Puerto Rican, born and raised in New York City. You're following the woman who is the sister who is a wedding planner, and then the brother who is in politics. And you kind of see the cracks in their life and the way that they live their life. Neither of them are in relationships. She never dates, and he has not been in a relationship since he divorced his wife. And you're kind of just, I don't want to say you're watching them be messy, but you're kind of just watching them live their life. It feels kind of slice of life. It takes place around and upcoming towards when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, so that does play a part in this. There's a lot of background information that has to constantly be given about the characters and why they are the way they are and how they've gotten to where they've gotten to. And I don't really think that was super well integrated into the story. For a contemporary book, there was a lot of info dumping. There is also, just so people know, one of the characters has a lot of internalized homophobia that's on the page, so just something to keep in mind. And yeah, the mom and her letters that she writes that are integrated into the novel, absolutely wretched. I could not imagine having someone be related to me that is like that like claims to love you. It was just to the point where like part of me can believe a person like that exists, but also part of it felt like unbelievable. Like part of me is like, are there really parents that behave that way? Like, are we sure that's real, or was she just like a mustache twirling villain? I don't know. Okay, and then I read another thriller. I read Real Easy. It's about a woman who is a stripper who goes missing. And then it's her perspective, and then it's kind of like a lot of different perspectives within the narrative. You kind of are following a lot of different characters. You're following the cops as they're trying to figure out where she is and like what's going on, and do they have a serial killer on their hands. This book did not do a good job at building tension. And what I mean to say by that is it was a very strange choice for the author to decide that every time they were going to lead you to think someone might be implicated as the murderer, you would then get their perspective and it would banish your idea of them being the murderer. So it was, instead of like having a lot of redirects and thinking, okay, it could be this person, or instead of having like a wide scope of suspects at once, the narration kind of chose to like hone in on someone and then discount that person, and hone in on someone and discount that person, which I don't, like, it kind of felt like you didn't understand the assignment on how to like build tension for your reading audience. One thing that I thought was interesting, I listened to the author interview after I listened to the audiobook, and the author was writing from her own experience working in strip clubs when she was younger, which I think was interesting. But overall, the story itself, it was fine. It was fine. Oh my goodness, I've read so many books. Okay, really quickly, like I said, alluded to before, I have started rereading the Farseer trilogy, which was the first trilogy in the realm of the Elderling. And again, I'm buddy reading it with Mariana, and we're kind of dissecting the book with hindsight. So we read Assassin's Apprentice in January. I thought it was a lot of fun. There were so many things I picked up on that I hadn't realized before. I had so many different perspectives on the characters and why they were the way they were, and I was much less judgmental about a lot of perspectives and characters that we got. Yeah, a lot of being able to read with hindsight, knowing about the world, knowing about where characters end up, knowing about the magic systems, and being able to pick out so many things that it's like, oh, is that what actually happened here? And I totally forgot about this seed that got planted. I think that that's one of the joys of rereads, when you can learn and see something new every single time and reinterpret a text, because hindsight gives you so much more to work with, and you realize that you kind of only saw through like the first few layers of the surface. And yeah, I love that about a good rereading experience. I think that you don't get a lot of books that are written in a way where that's how your reread is. So really love it. Rich for reread. I'm currently reading the second book, Royal Assassin, and feeling the same way. And then the last book I finished in January is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So this is technically a reread, but I read it when I was 16 and I forget most of it. This was an interesting book to read because I think most people know what the premise of the story is, because it kind of sits in the public conscience in a way. And so my impressions. I did not realize how overtly queer this book was. And I was actually reading that one of the editors edited out some portions that made it not just like overtly gay, but like written that it was, which I think is interesting. I did not pick up on any of that as a teenager. This is a book that I love the thematic content of. I think it's really interesting. I think it's rich in that. I can understand from that perspective why you would teach this in a school, because I think that there are so many themes that you could talk about. You could talk about queerness. You could talk about religion. You could talk about the soul. You could talk about, like, what it means to be a good or bad person. You can, like, conceptualize, like, what can turn someone bad, or is it from within, the nature-nurture thing. Like, I think that you could take that conversation in so many directions and have a really rich discussion about it. However, I did not like reading the book. I thought it was very boring for most of it. It was very short. I liked the plot point parts. I liked when people were talking back and forth. The pages and pages of talking about the book he's reading and the play he's watching and things where he's not, like, internalizing and, like, philosophizing about himself, I found dreadfully boring. It was also quite repetitive. There was a lot of, like, repeat language that was used. And yeah, so it was a really interesting thing because I love the thematic content, found the book extremely dull. But that is all I read in December and January. That was quite a list. I apologize for how long this is, but that is all I got. So until next time, happy reading.